Video, you can see a man sprint through the security screening area. Multiple agents draw their weapons in the direction the man just took off, and then a flood of...
A while ago saying quite an evening in D.C. Secret Service and law enforcement did a fantastic job. They acted quickly and bravely. The shooter has been apprehended, and
At 1942, 410 feet from the north portico and less than 70 yards from the east room, one armed man broke the line as 31 defenders tried to close the gap. The president had 7 minutes before the White House went into total internal seal, and the first ring had just 22 seconds to decide whether this was a lone shooter or the front edge of something larger. Their objective was brutally simple: keep him alive, find the second threat, and lock the complex before the numbers stopped making sense. They thought it couldn't be taken. They were wrong. The first shot didn't sound cinematic. It sounded flat, sharp, and wrong in a place designed to absorb ceremony, not panic. By 19 hours 42 minutes and 8 seconds, the Executive Protection Command had already moved the president off the public line and into the interior corridor off Cross Hall, while 2 White House security group officers folded the gunman's angle with ballistic shields and pushed staff toward the east room doors. But 4 camera feeds were missing. One credential on the east interior checkpoint had cleared 14 minutes earlier under a name that had been inactive for 9 months. And somewhere below the east wing, a service sensor showed a door open that the control board still marked closed. What they didn't know was whether those 3 problems were connected. What they didn't know was that the gunman kept firing without trying to advance. That was the mistake. Because men who want to escape move differently than men who want attention. By 19 hours 42 minutes and 31 seconds, Raven Desk, the crisis cell inside the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, froze the outer road grid from West Executive Avenue to Pennsylvania Avenue and started the primary timer, 7 minutes to total containment. At the same time, Meridian Analysis Cell launched a second clock. They had 19 minutes before every access log in one quarantined network segment auto-scrubbed under a continuity failsafe triggered by the first emergency protocol. The first clock was about survival. The second was about truth. Outside, the south lawn went still. Inside, shoes were sliding on polished floors, radios were clipping over one another, and every person with a badge suddenly had to prove they belonged there. The problem wasn't the shooter. The problem was that the shooter had appeared where the route sheet said nobody should have been. By 1943, agents had the president behind hardened doors, 1 floor and 2 turns away from the original path, while medical staff checked for fragments, shock, and hearing damage from the muzzle blast. No hit, no penetration, no blood on the principal. But in the confusion, 1 usher was down, 1 officer had taken a ricochet wound to the forearm, and a communications aide was missing from the last confirmed roll call near the diplomatic reception room. 3 gaps, 3 separate alarms. And the numbers still didn't match. If you want to see what they found beneath the East Wing, hit like right now because the first 7 minutes were only the cover story. The White House survives on choreography. Routes, timings, hold rooms, visual lines, choke points, backups for backups. That is why defenders inside the complex felt untouchable. Not because the building was impossible to breach, but because the building was never supposed to be understood all at once. Cross Hall, East Colonnade, the residence, the East Wing, the underground emergency spaces, the screened access lanes, the closed service corridors near West Executive Avenue, the support annexes tied to the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, every section was secure, but security lived in layers, and layers could be misread. What they didn't know was that somebody had been studying the seams instead of the walls. And that wasn't the real objective. The official story of the next 90 seconds would later say the assailant was unstable, isolated, cornered. That story was useful. It was also incomplete. Because by 19 hours 43 minutes and 27 seconds, Federal Continuity Bureau analysts had already flagged the first impossible detail: the shooter's visitor trail began nowhere. No arrival camera. No pedestrian approach from Pennsylvania Avenue. No flagged vehicle at the outer magnetometers. Just a badge signal, a movement pattern, and then gunfire. This wasn't a shooting. It was a disruption event wrapped in gunfire. While the protective ring compressed around the president, White House security group teams started sealing interior transitions between the East Room and ground floor stairs. Underground, 2 officers in heavy vests were sent toward the anomaly under the East Wing, not to clear a tunnel, not to chase a suspect, but to verify a sensor mismatch before the 19-minute wipe swallowed the logs. They weren't there for the gunman. They were there for the record of how he got there. By 1944, the man was no longer firing. He was moving backward, 1 step at a time, toward a blind edge near the service turn by the entrance hall, shouting words nobody in the after-action transcript could ever fully agree on. Some heard a demand. Some heard a name. 1 officer swore he heard the word binder. That should have sounded meaningless. It didn't. Because 6 days earlier, Meridian Analysis Cell had intercepted fragmented chatter about a physical archive item moved off an external site and into executive custody under emergency review. No location. No chain. Just a reference, red cover, 82 pages, hand-added tabs, non-networked annex. A binder. What they didn't know was whether the shooter knew that word, or wanted them to hear it. By 19 hours 44 minutes and 18 seconds, AK-9 team locked down the East Colonnade. At 19 hours 44 minutes and 33 seconds, the missing communications aide reappeared near the ground floor stairwell, alive, disoriented, and insisting she had been redirected by a uniformed man whose face she never clearly saw. At 19 hours 44 minutes and 51 seconds, the East Wing sensor opened again. Same door. Same false closed reading. That was the mistake. Because false readings happen once. Patterns happen because somebody built them. Comment lockdown if you think the shots were never the real attack. Now the defenders understood the shape of the problem. One visible threat. One invisible movement. One deadline on the logs. And a building full of people trained to treat the loudest danger as the most urgent one. The real target was deeper. While the gunman kept drawing eyes and weapons, 2 officers and 1 engineering specialist descended under the East Wing toward a narrow service corridor tied to old emergency infrastructure that public maps never explain correctly. No dramatic tunnel sprint. No breach charges. Just fluorescent light, locked utility cabinets, stale air, and a thin, red indicator over a reinforced panel that should not have been powered on during a ceremonial event. By 19 hours 45 minutes and 12 seconds, Raven Desk requested corridor schematics. By 19 hours 45 minutes and 26 seconds, the archive server said no sublevel room was active. By 19 hours 45 minutes and 29 seconds, a maintenance log surfaced showing authorized access at 1857 by a contractor who died 11 months earlier. The numbers didn't match. Not the door cycle count. Not the badge history. Not the manpower sheet. What they didn't know was that the dead contractor wasn't the ghost in the system. He was the mask. Upstairs, the gunman reached the corner of the service turn and finally made his mistake in full view. He looked left. Not toward an exit. Toward a clock. That single glance told the close team everything. He was waiting for something else. By 19 hours 45 minutes and 40 seconds, the outer ring crushed the space around him. Shields forward. Angles closed. Voice commands stacked over one another. He dropped to one knee, then both, still gripping the weapon, then rose halfway as if reconsidering surrender, until a tackle from his right collapsed him into the marble edge and drove the gun loose across the floor. 7 minutes had not passed yet, but close was no longer good enough. Because the shooter being down did not mean the event was over. It meant the event had moved. Type yes if you would have realized the man on camera wasn't looking for a way out. At 1946, exactly 4 minutes after the first shot, the president was secure, the visible threat was nearly contained, and the underground team found the panel. Not a vault door. Worse. A concealed archive room behind a maintenance faceplate, barely 12 feet wide, climate-controlled, clean, and active. Inside were 2 things: a red binder on a steel shelf, and a black mirrored server stack running on isolated power with 3 drives already in purge countdown. That was the reveal. That was the thing no one had wanted to say out loud. They weren't there for the president. They were there for proof. What they didn't know was what kind of proof demanded gunfire inside the White House to cover its removal. The engineering specialist reached the server first and saw the purge window, 14 minutes remaining. The officer on his left lifted the binder and found colored tabs marked relocation, continuity, authorizations, and emergency succession references that should never have been in the same physical volume. Several pages were gone. Tabs 6, 9, and 11 had been cut out with surgical precision. Not captured. Not reclaimed. Gone. And on the inside cover, written in block letters, were 3 initials matching 3 staff clearances still active inside the complex. That was the twist. The intel had been incomplete from the start. This wasn't one man reaching the president. It was one man freezing the room while someone else harvested the future. If this just turned from attack to conspiracy in your mind, share this because most people would stop the story at the arrest and miss the real objective. By 19 hours 46 minutes and 41 seconds, the gunman was on his knees, wrists locked, jaw bloodied, breathing hard, eyes fixed not on the officers around him but on the corridor leading east. One of the arresting agents later said he looked furious, not afraid. Because his clock was failing. Not the first one. The second one. Underground, the purge accelerated. At the same time, Meridian Analysis Cell found the source of the scrub command, an internal loop keyed to a badge still pinging from inside the East Wing, moving away from the archive room and toward a restricted service route connected by secured transition to the Eisenhower Executive Office building. That wasn't the real objective. The real objective was getting the pages out before anyone understood what had been taken. While one team processed the prisoner, another moved through the East Wing toward the moving badge. No hero sprint. No cinematic shootout. Just sealed doors, identity checks, diverted staff, and a corridor gradually emptied by command authority. Outside, West Executive Avenue was blacked out, federal vehicles cross-blocking every usable lane. Above, rooftop observation shifted from outward watch to internal overwatch. At 19 hours 47 minutes and 22 seconds, the badge stopped. At 19 hours 47 minutes and 40 seconds, it disappeared. At 19 hours 48 minutes and 3 seconds, officers found a discarded lanyard inside a custodial alcove, one latex glove, and a plain envelope with no writing on it. Inside the envelope were 3 binder tabs. Not the pages, just the tabs. Mocking them. The problem wasn't that someone had escaped. The problem was that someone had escaped after getting exactly what they came for. By 19 hours 48 minutes and 31 seconds, the red binder was moved to emergency custody. At 19 hours 48 minutes and 44 seconds, the mirrored server was isolated 9 seconds before full purge. At 19:49, 7 minutes after the first shot, the armed man was fully restrained on both knees under 6 weapons and 11 cameras, dragged upright, and taken through a secured interior route as the White House entered total internal seal. Headline over. Story not over. Because the recovered server didn't contain relocation routes or bunker diagrams or anything as simple as geography. It held transaction snapshots, compartment authorizations, burner identities, and expenditure trails linked to shell nonprofits, private contractors, and a program so deniable its paperwork had been broken apart across 4 agencies and buried under disaster planning language. This wasn't a breach. It was a ledger. They weren't there for territory. They were there for ownership. Comment red binder if you think the pages mattered more than the shooter ever did. At 1952, one more revelation hit. The missing 4 camera feeds had not been hacked from outside. They had been reassigned internally to a maintenance test group 27 minutes earlier using valid supervisory clearance. That meant the event had started before the president entered the room, before the shooter raised the weapon, before anyone heard the first shot. What they didn't know was how many people had signed onto that plan, only that at least one of them had just walked out wearing an employee face and a borrowed lane. The communications aide's misdirection now made sense. The fake contractor log made sense. The sensor mismatch made sense. Even the shooter's refusal to run made sense. He wasn't there to survive. He was there to hold the eyes of the building in one place long enough for someone else to go somewhere forbidden. That was the mistake. Not his. Theirs. They believed the loudest threat was the primary threat. In the next 31 minutes, 22 interviews began, 46 credentials were frozen, 8 offices were sealed, and the Federal Continuity Bureau quietly assumed custody of the binder, the mirrored server, and a set of handwritten visitor logs recovered from a side cabinet in the hidden room. Officially, the public saw an attempted attack stopped in 7 minutes. Unofficially, the government had just discovered that somebody inside its own continuity architecture had been selling access to the future. If you want the full breakdown of what was almost erased in those 14 minutes, hit subscribe because that file should never have existed in one room. By 2024, the complex was still locked. By 2103, the first external denials were already moving. At 2316, the first sealed transport left for an undisclosed federal site with the binder under chain receipt and the server drives in separate containers. And by 211, the arrest footage had become the least important evidence collected that night. Here's what they miscalculated. They assumed the White House could only be attacked from the outside. They assumed a kneeling gunman meant the danger had ended. And they assumed a hidden room was protection when it was really concentration risk. Final count, 2 friendly casualties both wounded and stable, 1 hostile captured alive, 0 defenders lost, 7 minutes 18 seconds from first shot to full arrest posture, 42 minutes total hard lockdown, 3 compromised credentials confirmed, 1 archive room exposed, strategic impact measured in a suspended continuity program, 11 sealed investigations, and an estimated immediate containment cost of $18.6 million. Type watched if you stayed to the end and caught when the real attack actually began. And if you want the next file in this chain, comment inside because the man on his knees was never the final prize.